Senator Roy Blunt, welcome, Big 550 KTRS.
Well, it's good to talk to you, McGraw. And another week in Washington where nothing got done. So the frustration level is pretty high with me, and I'm sure it is with everybody else in Missouri, too. There are a lot of things that need to be happening, and truly nothing is. In fact, last night, the Senate voted to change the rules of the Senate, which only happens about once every 60 or 70 years. So we wouldn't vote on an amendment that said the EPA couldn't have a rule that prevented farmers from having dust go from their farm to somebody else's farm. Now, anybody who knows anything about farming knows you can't farm without dust, but apparently the EPA doesn't know that, and literally, rather than vote on that amendment yesterday, the Senate, for the first time in decades, changed the rules so the majority could just decide, essentially to make the Senate the House by not giving every senator the right to bring up topics that they thought were important on a bill that was open to amendment. So, we're not getting the work done that needs to be done. We haven't had a budget in 900 days, and I'm about as frustrated as I've ever been with the federal government. The good news is that people in the country are talking about who we're going to be for the next 25 or 30 years, and I think they're going to decide we don't want to be Denmark or Italy or one of these Western European countries. We want to be us.
Senator, the only way one party is going to be able to do anything is to have the House, the Senate, 60 members in the Senate, and then the presidency. That's not going to happen anytime soon. So at some point, the two parties are going to have to work together.
Well, that's right. That's absolutely right. And, I've never been hesitant to say that if I can put something together where I can get 70% or 80% of what I want, I'm totally really ready to take that and move forward the next day and start working on the 20% I didn't get. The idea that if you can find a legislative compromise, that's somehow a loss. That's just not a loss. That's the way you live in a society with people who don't agree with you. It's the way you live in a house. It's the way you live in a community. And you do have to do that. But, you can do a lot of things with 51 senators of your party, and the other side has 53 right now. But I just think that the campaign on this jobs bill is just that. It's not any kind of sincere legislative effort. It's the president in states that are going to be competitive in the election last year talking about a bill that nobody's for and nobody thinks will pass, and that does get pretty frustrating.
Now, you might ask for 70% of you want 70% of what you want at work, but I think on the home front, if you turn to your wife and say, I'll compromise on 70% of the time, that won't fly.
No, at home, I accept 30%. She turns to me and says, I'll take the 70%. That's the way home works.
But I mean,
when I was the whip in the House, which is the chief vote counter in the House, either the whip or the chief deputy whip, that was 10 years. We passed 2 bills in 10 years that didn't have Democrats vote for them. So that was when government, we had these little tiny majorities. All Republicans didn't agree on everything. So every single day you had to find 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 Democrats in the House to get done whatever you were going to get done. And I'm not embarrassed by that because otherwise we wouldn't have gotten anything done. But you do have to figure out how to work together. But you don't work together by making the Senate, which is every senator has more ability to bring things up. You don't work together by deciding for the first time in decades, we're going to make the Senate the House because we don't want members to vote on this. Now, I don't know if that amendment would have passed or not, but I do know that apparently the majority leader was so intent on his members not voting on whether the EPA appointed by President Obama is so far off base on this rule that they call fugitive dust that we're going to change all the rules of the Senate just so we don't have to, just so that the majority members don't have to vote on whether this EPA idea is a good idea or not, because it's clearly not a good idea, but it's the idea of their administration, and they don't want to defend it.
It's almost like, Senator, that if the two parties don't work together in Washington, neither party can come home and throw dirt on the other because both are guilty, no?
I don't know about that. I do believe, and you and I have talked about this several times before, I do believe that about once every generation we have this disruptive debate about who we're going to be about once every 25 or 30 years. And whether it's 1980 or 1800 or 1828, the government sort of comes to a halt while we decide who we're going to be. So there's something a lot more important going on in the country than going on in Washington. And I'll just say the country couldn't survive this level of dysfunctional government forever, but I think it can survive it for another year as we do the minimum necessary for the government to keep functioning while the American people decide, are we going to be Western Europe, or are we going to be the United States of America? And it is a big choice, and I think that a year from now we make that choice, and that's pretty much who we're going to be for some time. That's the way big companies run. It's the way universities run. It's the way that the small businesses run. Sometimes you have a real short and kinetic debate about who you're going to be, and then that's who you have to be for a long time, or otherwise the business collapses. And so we're in this big debate, and it's an important one, and I'm optimistic about that. I'm very disappointed about a federal government that's not working at any level except the regulators that are working at hyperspeed. And when the Congress tries to weigh in and say what they think about some of these regulations, the majority in the Senate says, well, let's just change the rules rather than vote on that.
Roy Blunt, Senator from Missouri, while we have you, okay, a couple other topics. Missouri in a debate with itself over whether or not to stay in the Big 12 or go to the SEC. You have any comments on that?
Well, my friends from Kansas certainly have comments on that. I've heard from Pat Roberts, the senator from Kansas, on this every day for the last 2 weeks about how terrible it would be for Missouri to leave the formerly Big 12. But, you know, we've got to find a conference that works the best for us, and the Big 12 is either going to have to get better or Missouri has to look for somewhere where the money is allocated more fairly and the conference is working better, and I'd be pleased to stay where we are. I like the schools that we play. I think it's 8 of them, now 6 of them are a long-term rivalry, part of the old Big 8. But you can't have one school, TU, the University of Texas, taking so much of the money and making their own deals and still think that that's a conference that makes sense for everybody else.
Since we have spoken with you last, you've come out in support of Mitt Romney for president, Ann Wagner for Congress. Why don't you make some news and announce who you're supporting for the U.S. Senate seat? Sarah Steelman, Todd Akin, or now John Bruner?
Well, they're all friends of mine, and they've all helped me in one way or another. And I'm for this minute, I'm probably as committed as I'm going to be in pre-primary activities. But I do think that the Governor Romney of our candidates is the best prepared to handle the number one issue, which is the economy and private sector job creation. And frankly, I think he's the most likely of those candidates to get elected in November. And who the candidate is, who the nominee is, doesn't matter all that much if you don't win the election, and particularly if you don't win this election, because all the things that we just talked about being at stake, I think, are at stake in 2012.
Even though he signed legislation forcing Massachusetts residents to buy health insurance, you don't have a problem with that?
Well, I have a problem with it, but he's also done a lot to understand how the economy works, and he does say about Obamacare that his first action would be to take all the steps necessary to walk away from that bad plan and see what we ought to do about health care, and that I wish he had a different opinion on Massachusetts health care. But his opinion is that this is an issue that states, if they want to handle individually, individual states have individual needs, and I think the Constitution verifies that. So it's a constitutional view, and I agree with this position on Obamacare, which is actually more important to me than whatever his position may be on what happened in Massachusetts almost a decade ago now.
Missouri Senator Roy Blunt, always a pleasure, Senator. Have a good day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great to talk to you, and go Cardinals.
You got it. Thanks.